Okay, I think we'll get started. If I could encourage everybody to grab a seat. We'll begin the last segment of our program. Again, I'm Patrick Sieb, Executive Director of Destination Medical Center. Super happy to have all of you here participating. Okay, like who wants to be quiet first? There we go, thank you. Well done team. We are going to have our last presentation panel led by our own local rock star, Holly Masick of the Rochester Downtown Alliance. She is going to be hosting Jesse Baccarin from Graffito SP, Catherine Darns from Layton Design, and Tiffany Alexandra from Choo Choo Kachoo, best known for the night market. I want to say, I don't know if that's truly how you're best known, but certainly well known from her work with the night market. Very excited about this panel presentation and discussion around kind of new versions of retail, new strategies, new ideas, what's happening both locally and around the country, and what implication might it have for Rochester. So with that, Holly, I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And thank you for inviting me to participate today. My name is Holly Masick. I'm the Executive Director for the Rochester Downtown Alliance. As you'll hear from our speakers today who come from different places in the country, we are not the only area dealing with vacancy in retail and ground floor real estate. And there are lots of different approaches. A lot of our talks today looked at the future, what will happen in a year, 2 years, 5 years, but these panelists today are going to tell us what we can do now to activate those spaces. You'll see in the program, this was called Healthcare in a Retail Setting. That's not what you're getting today. You are getting activating inactive spaces. And so we're going to talk about pop-up, we're going to talk about experiences, we're going to talk about events, and we have some pretty amazing people who have done these types of projects to tell us what we could potentially do here or elsewhere. And so I'm going to introduce them, and then I'm going to give each of them about 5 minutes to present some slides about what they do and how they do it. Then we'll go into some panel questions, and then we'll open up the floor for a bit of questioning from the audience. So I'd like to introduce Jesse Baccarin from Graffito, Catherine Darnstadt from Layton Design, and Tiffany Alexandria from Choo Choo Kachoo. And we'll give Jesse 5 minutes or so to introduce himself.
Great, thank you, Holly. Hi, everyone. Wish I could be there with you. I also recognize, as Pat was saying, it's getting towards lunchtime, so maybe people are edging out of their seats. It's already lunchtime here in Boston, so I'm with you. So I'm going to share my screen and as Holly said, walk you through a few slides that I think will do two things: speak to the Graffito approach, but also serve as an introduction to who we are and what we do. Simply put, we operate in 4 silos, and the operation in these 4 silos grew out of a need for us in working with our clients and partners to think holistically about the ground plane. Retail leasing is where we started about 15 years ago, is about how do we put retail tenants in vacant boxes. But over time, what we realized is several things. One, we needed to have a much more multidisciplinary team to do this well. So we have a team that works on branding, environmental graphics, storytelling. We have a team that works on kind of upfront development services. And then we have a team that works on master planning with a specific focus on the first 20 vertical feet of the neighborhoods in which we're working. The second thing we learned, in addition to diversifying our team and our skill sets, so we have urban planner, architect, graphic designer, I'm an attorney by training, several real estate brokers, a chief of staff, et cetera, is that as we diversified our team, to be effective in our work, we also had to enter projects earlier. So in a very naive way, when we started and I founded Graffito, we were hyper-focused on just the marketing and the activating and, as I said before, putting tenants in space. And what we realized over time, which I suspect many of you have realized, is that to activate inactive spaces, to borrow Holly's kind of headline, we have to start as a team much, much earlier in the process. And, when you look at the projects in which we've deployed this approach, I'll go back quickly, which is, starting, really understanding the context in which we're operating, thinking through master planning, both vertical and horizontal synergies, and then actually getting into the development piece. Like, what are we actually building and how are we setting retailers up, both long-term and interim partners, for success? We realized three core things, and I think this connects all of the projects we worked on. Here I'm showing projects in Cambridge, Somerville, and Boston, Massachusetts. We realized that we've got to focus on best-in-class local operators. I think whether or not it's we're in the development team of this building, the Seaport in Boston, it's 12,000 square feet, or we've been part of the team with MIT's investment management company thinking about the evolution and the development at Kendall Square. Whether or not it's 500,000 square feet or 12,000 square feet, there's been a real focus on working with best-in-class local partners. And similarly, in all of these projects, there's a recognition that it's not all just about the retail. There are other anchors, whether they're open space anchors, or frankly, in the case of Cambridge Crossing and in Kendall Square and the Seaport, maybe those anchors are institutional anchors that we're looking to provide amenities for as a first step in building out a retail community. And then lastly, we've learned that storytelling is just of utmost importance. I'll leave you with two last slides before I kick it to Catherine. One is that in our work currently today and looking into the future, the pandemic has put a whole bunch of stresses on, or spurred or kind of opened our eyes to a whole bunch of stresses on small local owner operated businesses. Before it was, you couldn't even go in to dine in a restaurant or go to a yoga studio or shop in a kids clothing store. Now it's really about staffing and labor. It's a huge issue across the country facing small businesses that we're dealing with. And I'm sure in Rochester is no different. And then lastly, for Graffito in particular, and I'm sure many of you, it's how do we do our work in a much more inclusive, anti-racist way, recognizing that the majority, I would actually say all of the real estate that's been developed across the country in projects of the scale which Graffito works on are shaped by systemic racism. So lastly, what I'll leave you with is just our recognition and what we've learned, which is that when you're working on retail, it's about a lot more than just retail. And, you know, I'm sure Catherine and Tiffany will allude to this, but things like seating and lighting and public art and creating canvases for temporary events are as important to creating those physical boxes where you're going to put your retail tenants. So I think it all comes back to kind of a holistic look at the neighborhoods we're building. We're really excited about our work and, you know, excited to be talking to you all about it. So with that's my intro. I'm going to kick it to Catherine, I believe.
Yes. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Afternoon, everyone. My name's Catherine with Layton Design, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and our work from Chicago. We are an architecture, urban design, and interiors firm leveraging civic innovation and social impact to design more equitable spaces and systems. And the scale of work that I'm going to talk about today is the smallest scale of work that we've been taking on, kind of that fits in the realm of placemaking, tactical urbanism. However, whatever title or category you put it into, we try and make sure it's neon whenever possible. We also look at, you know, how Jesse was talking about that kind of first 20 vertical feet of space. We really start to look at that first 20 horizontal feet of space within our cities, and this kind of like this hardscape and this pavement, whether we're overtaking, you know, streets or sidewalks for new design interventions or creating marketplaces. This is a current installation that's going up down the south side of Chicago for a corridor renovation and rehab for a full block. We also kind of look at it through the experiential and thinking about how can we actually create new systems to allow making events or pop-up retail more accessible, because probably everyone also on this panel found out that it's the smallest scale projects are just as difficult as the largest scale projects and have a series of barriers and you know, sometimes feels like overcomplicated permitting and licensing systems attached to them. About 6 years ago, I started an initiative to think about what is pop-up retail in Chicago and looked at using shipping containers as a way that we could use a modular system to create spaces across the city that would allow for more retail, more arts and culture, anything that you could put in something this size. So we were able to kind of look at it from this scale to this. So we were able, this is the very first boombox that we created, very intentionally not looking like a shipping container anymore. And that was by design. to think about an elevated experience, but also like what happens within a pop-up retail space. Where are there gaps already within our local commerce when we feel, everyone probably on the panel and then in the audience says we want to support local businesses and our small businesses, but what does that really look like when, the majority of your small businesses are considered micro entrepreneurs who are making under $500,000, 250, sometimes even under $100,000 a year? They're not going into your traditional commercial retail spaces. They're not building your corridors. They're priced out already. They're too black, they're too brown, they're too female run. They're just not the ones that are considered the quote unquote safe businesses. And so we started to think about ways that we could illuminate these barriers, but then create new access points. This first boombox ended up spawning 5 more across the city of Chicago. And by the end of the 5-year program, we ended up supporting over 200 different small businesses. Over 85% of them were women of color like myself. And we even had the fun chance to apply this in different variations and configurations. We looked at this as the one-off module. So what does one pop-up storefront look like when you create it in an otherwise vacant space? This was an underutilized plaza. The other one we looked at is, well, what happens if you take up a full block? And this is a site for a building for a tower, a high-rise tower that was going up in Chicago. And the developer reached out to us, Related Midwest, and they said, we want to be a better neighbor. We know we're going to be like 2 to 3 years before we actually develop this site. We tore down all the buildings. It could have construction fencing up for 2 or 3 years, or what else could we do? Can we make a market out of it? That's how I inadvertently became the person in Chicago who knows everything about modifying shipping containers. And so we worked with them to create, how do we think about this block? It's a block. We can't jam a whole market on it, but we can take up the first 25 feet of it and create a market space with 7 unique storefronts, a courtyard, and then even enough space for a basketball court in the back, and the early versions of a putting green. We were fortunate for the 2 years that we ran this particular market. We had many beautiful people that like to hang out in the space itself. And in here as well, what we started to see is how this location starts to fit that mantra that we had from Boombox on bridging the gap between startup and storefront, because now we start to see businesses 5 years later, so that as architects and as developers are going into the traditional bricks and mortar, because now they have shown proof of concept. They've shown, that they're not a risky business, and they've shown their demand. And also we've been able to leverage a network of people, of finance partners, of real estate, commercial realtors, of developers who really understand then the mission and the needs of small businesses and want to attract them into the spaces. And I'll close with a short little video to kind of talk about and show how this one particular pop-up came to be, which was called Box Shops. Just the work that went into it. This was a very tight timeline. So we got the call from Related in about January, early February, that they said, hey, we want to market on the site. And we were open by Memorial Day. And so if you think about, design, construction, fabrication, installation, permitting, renting, getting all your vendors, getting open, like that's a tight timeline to get that done within, 5 months altogether. And this is kind of a little bit of the back of house, like the messiness that you see. Many people think that when you have a shipping container, you can just drop it on the ground and like open it up and it's fine. And this is definitely not what it needs to be. It's the exact opposite of what you want a container to do, is a retail space. So we have a lot of work and modification that ends up having to go into creating a marketplace itself. And then for us, our biggest difficulty is we wanted to sell beer. So that was its own challenge, to get a liquor license, to get attached to a structure that isn't considered a building in the city of Chicago. So seeing those and illuminating those areas where, where the licensing and kind of the the existing approvals processes, the review and approvals processes just aren't made for micro retail, aren't made for small businesses, aren't made for night markets, right? And so that's what we were able to then illuminate. And then in the end, by the end of all of this work, we've modified or made 3 new pieces of public policy for the city of Chicago to now allow for pop-ups, for markets, for things like that, because our projects have been able to illuminate that gap that we see in our city. And then I will hand it over.
All right, thank you so much, Catherine. Let's bring it over to Tiffany.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tiffany Alexandria. I am originally from Taiwan, and I like to share food and culture with Rochester. So last year, because of the pandemic, haven't traveled for a year or two, and I really miss home, and I really miss going to the night markets at home. So I thought about how we could potentially bring one to Rochester, and also in Rochester, there's a lot of diversity, but we don't see them on the day-to-day basis for, I don't know why, but it just a little less represented in general. So a night market is a great way for these entrepreneurs and small businesses to showcase what they have and share it with us. And a night market is just a part of a daily life. And every night after work, I would go to the night market, whether to shop, to eat, or just hang out with my friends. There's no pressure, and like everybody's welcome. So we did 3 events last year, one in July, one in August, and one in September, and each of them attracted over 6,000 people to each event, which is crazy. And we activated the space in front of Civic Center and all the way into the Rochester Arts Center. And this was what it looked like when everybody showed up and everybody came to just have fun and support local small BIPOC businesses. And it's just really amazing to see. And because we had so many attendees, a lot of people, our vendors couldn't keep up, especially the food vendors. So a lot of people overflowed to downtown businesses as well. So that was really fun to see downtown being packed. This is the indoor space of the art center being activated. We hung lanterns and we set up artists to live paint on the 2nd floor of the art center, overlooking the whole city and all the people attending the night market. We also had lantern painting activities indoors, set up some vendors indoors as well. And we had a lot of vendors. So all our vendors are local, so Southeast Minnesota, if not all from Rochester. There are a few from St. Paul, but we have vendors of all different backgrounds. And it still makes me want to cry that there were a lot of first-time vendors and they just try so hard, and they were so happy and excited about this opportunity. And there were also a lot of community members asking me whether this is going to happen next year, because they really want to bring Cambodian food to the market, bring Filipino food to the market. We have so much in Rochester, but not all of us could afford to have open a restaurant, because you need more capital to do that. We supported over 40 vendors throughout the 3 events. A lot of them signed up for all 3. All of them had a great experience. And really enjoyed the night market, the audience, and just being able to share their food or culture and whatever they are making with Rochester. And we also had a variety of performers. A lot of them were also first-time performers. Down the corner here, this Mila, she just moved here from California. She's originally from Peru. And she was really excited. She's like a really kick-ass pop artist. And she was so excited to have a platform to perform in Rochester. And over here, we have KSKMM. They are a traditional Khmer dance group, and their dances are just beautiful, and they have all the traditional outfits, and the teacher is so passionate. She just wants to teach these kids and pass their tradition on to them, but they don't always have a platform to perform and share their dances and culture and music with the rest of the community. So this was a really fun event and for them to perform it.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you to all three of you for sharing examples of your work. As you can see, a tremendous amount of energy and resources goes into producing work like this. I've very closely watched what Tiffany did and the amount of work that was poured into it. And we're now at a point where the question is, how can we support this type of work? And as a developer or a property owner, you may have noticed that these are people that you pay as consultants to fill your spaces rather than tenants who are paying you to be there. So what is the return on investment? What is the value proposition? If it's going to be 3 years before you're built out, why would you put an extra investment into your property to support this type of work? And so I would like each one of our presenters to answer in their mind, what is the value proposition here? What is the return on investment, whether that's financial or social or something else? We'll go in the same order. Let's start with Jesse.
Thanks, Holly. It's a great question. I'll start with the financial because I think that's someplace in our experience, that's kind of the first place that developers get hung up on. And, I would say a couple things. One is that there are all sorts of things developers invest in, so look at Tiffany's program is cultural infrastructure in the same way you'd look at, investing money in landscape architecture, right? That's not cultural, but like there are all sorts of things we spend money on to make inviting, livable, interesting places. And fundamentally, the reason we're doing that is to create valuable real estate, whether it's 20 feet horizontally or 120 feet vertically around your assets. And, the ROI, simply put, it's been our 15-year experience that commercial tenants, whether it's lab, which we have a lot of here in Cambridge, or office, also have a lot of that here, or residents, want to live and are choosing to live in places that are exciting and different and vibrant and have both cultural and actual kind of day-to-day amenities. So I think where we're going in the future is that it's going to be harder to lease the space above and around without some of these things. And it's an expectation that folks have. And without making investment into these things, retail included, you're going to get less of a return on your investment in the stuff above and around than you would otherwise. Sometimes you can rely on great organizations like the organization Holly runs and kind of hope that they put in all the money and they do it, or municipalities do it. But I ultimately think this falls on the developers to do in their projects. So we've experienced a lot of success boosting rents, boosting neighborhood scale value. But I would leave you all with the reality that this isn't for every landowner. We understand if you own one 5,000 square foot strip of retail only, it's hard to subsidize those costs based on upstairs rents. And we also recognize if you're a short-term owner and you're not truly invested in the community for the long run or real estate for the long run, you're not going to be nearly as incentivized as a developer is investing in a neighborhood, in a place, in a city for a generation or more. And that's why for Graffito, our partners and our clients, even the example that Catherine showed, are typically folks that are investing for the long term in these neighborhoods.
Thanks, Jesse. Catherine?
Yeah, to build on that, I'll focus a little bit more on the social aspect of this, because I agree with everything Jesse said. We found that, this is also just the actual reality of where retail businesses might be going. You know, we kind of saw three main tenants that came through the pop-up space. There was the one who had the side hustle and was never going to get a retail space. They were going to have the side hustle. They were going to live mostly virtually, but they wanted to have a physical space for a moment. That is also a shift that we're seeing generally across retail, where even larger chains are going to try stores rather than buy stores, quote unquote, where you go like Bonobos, you go try something on and you're going to go buy it, you know, maybe a week later, or you might buy it and get it shipped to you. So that changes just the type of retail that could exist within a space. The second type of vendor we saw was the one that really just needed a chance. They were always good, you know, and they had a great product and they needed to scaffold up. And so what we see in some of our examples with those vendors who just needed to be out there and kind of like put their full brand out 100%, they've grown, you know. So we had a cheesecake vendor who was in one of our pop-ups. They sold out every day from day one. There was a line down the street. They went into a storefront of a neighborhood developer, you know, down the street. So they went from the pop-up, they went to a storefront, and now they're so large, they went on QVC and sold out cheesecakes in 8 minutes. And now they were building a manufacturing place for them. So the good ones will always be good. And if you run with them, you can like build your real estate with them as well. But ultimately, I think when you think about who supports this, I think it's in between, right? I think there's a huge component of like the startup that has to be heavily subsidized. In some of the neighborhoods we were working in, they needed to be subsidized. The rents needed to be subsidized, and that was through the city or municipal or kind of neighborhood partners. But then different markets allow it to not be subsidized. You know, because we were in different neighborhoods across the city with different price points. I think what is helpful as advice to landlords or developers is thinking about your requirements, because what made people, what we did that honestly was probably the biggest increase to access to real estate was that we weren't requiring a 3 or 5 year lease. We weren't requiring these huge deposits. So we were making it much more accessible to small businesses who don't have like the same credit history, line of credit, references, or, you know, didn't have to commit. And then that was also ultimately one of the biggest kind of infrastructure pieces that we did to allow more access to spaces.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I think we'll come back to the question of reducing barriers to entry a little bit later, but let's go to Tiffany. What is the ROI of this type of work?
I think for me, community is always important. If you invest in the community and if you invest in the people around it, then it'll always come back to your business. And for this event specifically, it also showed people how this space can be activated, can be used for future renters if they ever want to do events like this. This had never been done before. So now they see what can potentially happen and they can rent the space and do an event perhaps bigger than this if they want to.
I think that's really true. I think showing people how you can use a space, whether it's an underused plaza along a waterfront that we all tend to forget that we have, or turning an old beloved dive bar into a skateboard shop. It really pushes you to imagine your own community differently. And so I heard a number of themes come up in each of your introductions of elements that you bring to your work. I heard highlighting the best-in-class local operators. I heard highlighting local diversity, I heard lighting and design. I'd like to know from each of you what you think some of the most important elements of a pop-up or a space activation might be, and feel free to be brief because I have other questions. I'm going to start with Tiffany.
I think just people and ideas, just have great ideas and great people and put it together.
Catherine?
I think for us, one of the hallmarks was the design. The space looked unique, it looked elevated, and it was award-winning in the end. And I think that ultimately made it more attractive and set people apart when they were in it.
Jesse?
I'd say two things. The first is just flexibility from a design perspective, also from a transactional perspective, and being willing as a landowner to be super flexible. And the second is, to Tiffany's point, this is all about the operator. It is who is the individual or set of individuals who are doing this intervention, who are putting up this pop-up, who are being a resident in your space. It all comes back to the strength and the vision of the operator.
Thank you. And with that, how do you find a good partner? If you're going to try to do a pop-up shop or an inactive space, if you, as a property owner, receive an inquiry from someone who has an idea, how do you vet them out? How do you find the right partners for these types of programs? Let's start with Catherine.
Yeah, thinking about that, what we found is most of our vendors were within 1 degree of a previous vendor, and that was kind of this network of trust and recommendations that just kind of grew over the 5 years of the program. So that was one way that we started to kind of understand who knew what they were doing, saw someone else in action, was ready to like understand how to run out of the gate in here. And then we kind of had the same level of information required that you would for your typical commercial rent or your commercial lease. But I think the fact that everyone was relational in terms of we're small business hustlers, like that meant a lot. That was kind of this intangible that I can't describe very well, but it meant a lot to knowing who was going to work or not work within a space.
Thanks. Tiffany.
So for me, being new in Rochester, I think for me, I started with local organizations I knew already does good work, and I just ask for help.
Sure. Pull the thread. How about you, Jesse?
I think if you're in Rochester, you just go to Tiffany. But other than that, our approach has always been going direct to the source and recognizing that, the young chef, the owner of that skateboard shop, Holly, folks that are embedded already within the retail maker and arts community, they are a community. They are part of a community. And I think not overthinking it and trying to actually identify and say, this is who I want, keeping open mind and saying, all right, this is somebody who knows a lot more than I do about the community I'm looking to attract, and finding that gatekeeper, that person who's got a reputation or is respected or trusted within that community. That's always worked really well for us.
Perfect. All right. So getting back to the barrier to entry question, since we have a lot of elected officials and people from the city here in this room, what steps can cities take and can private property owners take to reduce obstacles when we're trying to take on projects like this? A lot of time we run into liability questions, insurance questions, liquor licenses, permitting. What can cities do to make this an easier lift? Let's start with Tiffany. Feel free to talk directly to your audience here.
I think for me this time doing an event for the first time, it was just a lot of hoops to jump through. I didn't know where to start. And when I tried to ask, I didn't even know what questions to ask. So maybe to help people activate spaces in this way or in this sense, is there possible to have like a complete document 101 event planning for dummies, that all the things that I need to do and who to actually talk to, or just have like a dedicated person, maybe like an event planner and city department of sorts that I could just ask them?
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, we ended up creating a document like that for Peace Plaza.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're working in spaces like this, the rules are so different from, are we on a sidewalk? Are we in a parking space? Are we public right of way versus private property?
And the scale, and like whether there's food involved, there's alcohol involved, there's cooking on site involved, and like different culture things mixed into it, got kind of complicated.
Yeah. And so I think part of what we all ask for is an attitude of, yes, let's try and figure this out, rather than no, that is not possible. Jesse, let's go to you.
Yes, Tiffany was talking, I was just scribbling down a few things. I think her idea about having a designated liaison at the city that works with a small business community is a great one. I think making sure that it's probably a research project for somebody at the city to understand, do I have the right special event licensing paradigm, the right beer garden paradigm, the right temporary use of space paradigm in place from a regulatory perspective? And then making sure that the documentation is in plain English, or often just times not only in English, right? So it's written not for lawyers, it's written for lay people, and it's also translated into many other different languages depending on the context you're in. The last thing I would say, which the city of Boston is working on, is also having a roadmap that is available. So you have an idea, just where do you go? Like literally a choose your own adventure type document that entrepreneurs can look at that says, is food involved? Yes, then I go here, right? Is it a pop-up that is just soft goods? Then I go here. Is it one day versus multi-day? I've seen some documents that have worked really well. And I think, Holly, last thing to your point, most cities, Boston, Cambridge included, the assumption is the retailer is not going to do the right thing. This attitude of yes and just assuming that these great local operators are in fact going to do the right thing, they have way more at stake than the municipality, way more at stake. That shift in attitude to enable and support versus to protect the public, which is, by the way, is very important, but oftentimes puts up all of these barriers from a regulatory perspective that make it impossible. So I think the attitude shift is key.
Definitely agree on that. And I think what you also have to add to that is that it also has to be a living document that you have to think about as this policy is when you have new policies in place. Because when we first started Boombox, the answer was no across 6 departments. It wasn't one department, it was across 6. And, it was building department, zoning department, public health, because we were looking at food, arts and culture, because we wanted cultural performances. I just wanted someone to play a guitar, I didn't know I needed a permit for that. Let's see, and who else? And then business licensing. So, business licensing, and since we were on the public right away, it was also Department of Transportation. So that's 6 departments just ready to say no at any given point in time. And so it took a year to get to the yes point, and then it took another year to write the policy that would change that. Because ultimately we had to look at policy that would allow for temporary structures, right? And then temporary vendors, and then shift how we looked at our public land use. Because once you frame it into first finding your advocates with all the within the departments to help you get to an attitude of yes is huge, because no one's coming in with an idea that's so off the wall that somebody already hasn't thought of it in a department and just they need outside validation as much as you need internal department validation. So that is finding your advocates, making documents living, because once they're out and alive and these policies are put in place, vendors and experiences are going to shift, and you're going to find something new that now you have to say, oh, we have to review and look at this again. And then ultimately, thinking about how can you look at shifting your policies within municipality to think about what do we need to do to support the smallest of businesses, because every politician at any point in time has said a phrase along the lines of small businesses are the backbone of our communities, our neighborhoods, our city, and look at that as how do we actually make that true and make really the small businesses, and look at our own business data and see where our small businesses lie. It's not SBA small business data, which is $8 million or $7 million gross revenue or less. Small businesses in your neighborhood are like really at $500,000 or less. And you have to make the policies work for that section, not a different metric that you're aligning yourselves to.
All right, thank you. I think with that, I'd like to open the floor up to questions from the audience. I'm sure you all have specific scenarios you've got thoughts about, or something triggered your imagination. So please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. No one?
Everyone agrees with us completely. That's amazing. That's awesome.
Hi, I'm Tom Hexum. How are you? Thank you. That's a great presentation, but I had a couple questions and you started to answer them somewhat as relates to the public sector side for the pop-ups and what we're running into in Rochester, and other people can speak to that better. Where do these items fit in? Bright lighting from where I park to where I get to my pop-up for public safety, that we've got a lot of problems in our downtown area that we're trying to promote with public safety, police-wise. Number 2, the public safety coming and going. Plus, while I'm attending your event on a location or at a location, I want you to talk about that. What's going on in these areas that you're doing that? And number three, how does the public health sanitation ADA laws get fulfilled? How do they get fulfilled so that everyone is treated equally? People who want to attend your events or festivals or whatever it might be, in our circumstance here in the medical city, the medical capital of the world, fully 1.5 visitors that come with each patient, or one half of a visitor, might be wheeling that person in a wheelchair. So we're unique because we have this medical community, but we're also unique by the standards that we need ADA bathrooms wherever these pop-ups are. And then we've got the sanitation and the public sector side that isn't being answered on that. So somewhere in our DMC infrastructure, we've got to address, if we're going to have pop-ups, we need to address these ADA access, electricity, gas, sewer, water, bathroom facilities. I love your idea, what you're doing. We've got this riverfront we're going to do. They did this in Cedar Rapids, and it's the Polish National, whatever it is, and they've got these event centers, and it's exactly what you're talking about. Cultural events that can be promoted, but the facilities are set up so that this happens every week, and it happens all the time. It's an ongoing, and then the community sprung up around it in Cedar Rapids. It's a great deal. It's really successful, like you're talking about, if we can just get over our own barriers, but we have certain things we've got to do ADA wise, and so that
Thanks,
everybody.
Tom. I'm going to actually open it up to the panelists. I think the question about ADA accessibility is a really good one. When you're dealing with a temporary event, it can be challenging to put everything in place that you want to put in place. And so I'll leave that to any of the three of you to answer. How do you make your pop-up spaces lighter, quicker, cheaper, but also accessible to as many audiences as possible?
I could answer that. I can start with this. So when we did the box shops piece that I showed the video for, I realized I need to be in the sanitation business because we had to rent an ADA toilet that we had to have for the whole season. So we had one of, if you go to a festival and you have like a VIP toilet that you can use, it's usually one of these. It was really nice. It was brand new, fitted out, but it was made the lighter, quicker, cheaper, not cheaper anymore in terms of when you look at not only the rental fees, but then the service fees and all of these pieces. So we definitely saw that. How we've looked at that is, how do we work with adjacent businesses? Like, is there infrastructure around us that we could use or utilize? So that was one way. That's like kind of like the lowest tier, like use what's available. And then, you know, in Chicago for events, we kind of put all the responsibility on the event host. So they're the ones that have to look at security, lighting, ADA access. That's all their responsibility, not the municipality. Obviously, that doesn't help with access, lighter, quicker, cheaper. But then the next level is like, okay, we want these types of events. So what do we need to do from an infrastructure standpoint? So when you talk about bathrooms and lighting, does that mean as a city, you have to have a discussion around, well, what does our public right of way and our public experience look like? Do we need to have infrastructure upgrades? Are we okay with public bathrooms in strategic locations and making permanent infrastructure changes? You know, that's where these temporary kind of provocations have to lead to some sort of permanent process, right? Because they're posing questions, right? They're showing gaps. And those are the discussions like everyone wants to get to, but we don't know the answer quite yet. And so hopefully it's a good and collaborative and continued discussion to look at how you support that.
Anyone else want to take that one?
I can just add that to the question, these are kind of non-negotiable elements in everything that we're doing. And I think it speaks to safety, it speaks to inclusivity, and it speaks to success. So, you know, we talk about pop-ups as if they just pop up. I mean, as you could tell from both the presentations, pop-ups sometimes take as much planning as opening a retail establishment, right? So I think these things all have to be baked into the planning and the budgeting. And, you know, one of the things that we've done as an example, recognizing to the gentleman who asked the questions, concerns how important lighting and safety and bathrooms and ADA accessibility is that's given us a lens through which to look at what sites are suitable or not. And the other thing it's been really helpful is that it's allowed us to make certain investments in vacant spaces. So they are ADA. They do have an ADA bathroom. We are building out bathrooms. We're white boxing a space that can be kind of a hub to host multiple different pop-ups. So I think for all of us talking here, we're all in the real estate development world. This is just something we have to plan for. And we'll make a certain site or a certain place or a certain canvas not nearly as acceptable or optimal as others.
And I think it's worth mentioning that in terms of safety, generally speaking, the more positive activity you have going on in a space, the safer it's going to be. Crowds actually tend to make people feel safer and like it is a more hospitable environment for them. And that's something that, I really appreciate about the night market was this was a space that wasn't usually accessed, that was usually very quiet, and that it brought big crowds of people and allowed them to think of it as a usable space.
Yeah, I think that was really cool. There were a lot of attendees saying that they lived in Rochester for a while and never felt like they were at home or never felt like they could just belong somewhere. But the night market made them feel that way, like they could just be there. So that's cool.
Yeah. We have a question in the back.
All right, thank you. And I just want to thank so much for that question about safety and ADA. That's really important. So I know everyone gets their news from different venues and different media. I get mine from the local paper and from local news networks. Some younger people in my ward get a lot of news from social media. And I know there's language barriers and there's economic barriers. Many people, when I was an educator, had to go to the school to get Wi-Fi because they did not have that in their home. So my question is to make events truly inclusionary and equitable for all the population. What do you recommend would be the best means of advertising so that not just those who have, access to certain media or connections attend the events?
I think finding the community spot. So for the night market, I knew to put out posters and flyers, but people who are accessing it at, say, Cafe Steam would be really different than the people who are going to the Asian food store or These Market. And these are their community spaces. People go there to shop. People from all over different backgrounds would shop at different places. So I think about the little stores in the community and use that as your advertising space. Ask them to help spread the word, really make the difference for night market specifically.
Catherine, Jesse, would either you like to speak to that?
I'll quickly say, you have to add to that, you kind of have to also market everywhere. And I think part of what we did that I think helped in terms of reaching more diverse audiences is we also had it as part of one of our requirements is that the vendors that are going into the space have to actually show what they're marketing and who they're marketing to, that they have to actively do it. That's not just us, that it's them. And then that also, it creates another network and then another network and then another network that then start to come back again and again. But I think the biggest thing is, to dispel an illusion that just kind of exists is that the pop-up market isn't suddenly going to be successful right out of the gate, right? It takes time. Sometimes it's a slow burn, and sometimes there's vendors that have a huge audience and some that don't. So making sure every business is still doing their own marketing on top of all the rest of the overall marketing is helpful.
Thank you. All right. Oh, we got one more, or are we concluding?
No, I have a question specifically
Okay.
for Tiffany, if I could.
Perfect.
So based on your experience, Tiffany, in 2021, what does the night market in 2022 look like?
Currently, no plans has been made yet. But a lot of people are asking, and I think it would be interesting and exciting to bring back.
Yeah.
But still procrastinating at this moment.
Oh, yes. And I'm sure sponsorship would be appreciated. And another point that came up in our prep for this call is how important it is to pay your artists and pay the people that contribute their time and energy and design to make these spaces wonderful. So with that, I want to just thank everybody that participated in this panel and preparing it. And thank you all for being here today. Oh no, we have another. Okay, one more. I'm trying to be respectful of time, Patrick. Keep your show going.
I can leave my question for a different day if we need to.
No, let's hear it.
So as an ecosystem navigator who helps our entrepreneurs in town, one of the things that I found in our research is that resources are not a problem, but rather the leaders who are entrusted with the authority to say yes or no. So you guys spoke about the flexibility of, them being flexible to say yes or no, or be more open and assume the best in our entrepreneurs, because a lot of them will get discouraged before they even start. So good luck or even scaling, right? So how have you guys found a way, can you share some ways that you've been able to connect with those leaders who are entrusted with the opportunity and the authority to say yes or no? How have you guys done that successfully? Is it just trial and error, or there's some tangible things that you can leave me with that, hopefully we can share that with the community?
I think for my experience, it was just the idea has to be good, but also you need to be able to communicate it clearly to those in leadership, and it's something that they want to support and also believe in in my case, was important. I think that's kind of how I got a lot of the sponsorships, because this is a goal that they all share and they want to see it happen.
Right. I think to add to that is best practices and case studies that you could show that are relevant, and getting that information. I know with the boombox model, even though we knew that it would work and we had here's a pathway, here's how we can make it work. And the first meetings were all no. Cleveland actually made a pop-up market, and our good Chicago Midwestern pride couldn't be upstaged by Cleveland. So taking Cleveland's case study and saying, this is what they did, we could go see it. It's relevant, it's within our region, and these are the types of businesses that helped move the needle a little bit more. Because when we were showing examples from the coast or London, it wasn't resonating as well. So, thinking about relevant case studies I think did a lot of work for us.
Yeah. I think we bump into that too here, Catherine, of yes, we can show an international or a coastal model, but we also need to show a Midwestern one just to warm the idea up a little bit and know that we can do it here too. And then Jesse, you unmuted?
Yeah, these are such great points. I mean, I think at times with regulators and gatekeepers, we've gone as far as a firm is putting in front of them hypotheticals where we can't actually find an operator for a demonstration project. So I think starting small with something that feels executable and kind of paving the way for future entrepreneurs, it is always more effective to do it within your regulatory paradigm than trying to bring in a case study from elsewhere. And I think it's worth just saying, and I think both the other panelists would agree, I mean, I've had the advantage of leveraging my white privilege in some of this, but we've found that at the end of the day, there is so much bias baked into what gets approved and what doesn't, based on the identity, the ethnicity, and the race of the operators, that's something that we as a community in Boston, Cambridge are working really hard with our municipalities and making sure that we're correcting those wrongs. Because I think in every neighborhood we worked in, that's real. And I'm sure Catherine experienced this in Chicago and Tiffany probably experienced it in Rochester. So I think that's an element that as a community is probably important for Rochester to talk through, because my gut is that is a barrier.
Thank you. And then I think we're going to take one final question, and luck of the draw, who gets it?
Yeah, Kenneth Bush here, minority business owner and advocate for other minorities. And I've been in Rochester for 44 years, Tiffany. And I want to say that the fact that we're hearing the words white privilege and diversity, equity, and inclusion and things like that goes to show that our community is open and welcoming and has been having this dialogue for some time. And I just want to say our previous world-renowned mayor, Chuck Azama, was a mayor of diversity in this community. And so it's folks like you, Tiffany. I just want to say congratulations on your success. Stay motivated. It's folks like you and others that are paving the way and making the advertising happen just by your actions. So keep it going. please.
Thank you.
You're welcome, honey.
All right. Now I believe we conclude. All right.
Well done, Holly
Thank you.
and group, Tiffany, Catherine, Jesse, thank you very much. I think it was a really great interactive and encouraging discussion. And thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for your participation throughout the day. I do want to thank Allison again and Chris from our team leading this effort. We promised that the document that Liz shared, which is really a platform for any of you who are representing properties, landlords, property owners, any brokers. This is really a platform that you can use to help tell the story of why Rochester when telling a story about retail opportunities. So these are fresh off the press. They're out in the lobby available. So feel free to grab one or more, and we'll have those available both today and in the future. So again, thank you all. I appreciate it. And go enjoy the rest of your day. And it looks like a beautiful one out there. Thank you very much.